This is Dr. Gala, founder of Complete Care Health Centers and drthadgala.com, also the author of The Secret to Defy Disease and Decay. A question that I get oftentimes is, well, Dr. Gala, isn't what you teach pretty much paleo? And I want to dispel a couple of myths in this video as to why I'm not a big fan of paleo and what it's become. Now, to be clear, I'm a huge fan of Dr. Lauren Cordain. I've actually had the pleasure and luxury of actually, when I was in school over a decade ago, of fundraising and bringing him out. I was able to have dinner with him, and this was probably back in, I think about, if memory serves me right, about 2004, 2005. When I was in school, I fundraised and actually brought Dr. Lauren Cordain out to our school to give a talk. And Dr. Cordain is actually the founder of the Paleo diet, for those of you who don't know. And when I spoke with him, he said that he got his information from Boyd Eaton, who was another researcher and did a lot with anthropological type studies. I actually was interested, I looked back in actually my undergrad and found that I took an anthropology class that was actually citing some of his work. So my connections with these authors goes way back, and I have utmost respect for them and the research that they're doing. So we know that what Cordain's work was really the pioneer of what we now know as the paleo diet. However, what we're looking at today from the paleo diet is far, far stretch from what was originally intended. And the reason that I'm not a big fan of saying what we do is paleo or recommending people do paleo, because when you go on the internet, there's a whole host of issues out there and problems that I see people are faced with, of the interpretations of it. I see so many lay people, if you will, that are taking interpretations, and they're great marketers, and they go out and they make an info product, or they make something and they slap the word paleo on there somewhere. And because paleo has all this buzz, thanks to Cordain's work and pioneering this field, that they lump in foods and activities and items that are very desirable. And because they put the word paleo on there, they can get people to buy into their idea and their concept. Now, I'm not saying that you don't want to make things healthy and fun and easy as best you can, but that's why I'm not a big fan of the word paleo, because it's essentially been so, for lack of a better word, it's been so inundated with inappropriate interpretations. So one of the things that I find is huge is on the paleo diet. Obviously, one of the things is fruit, and I see a lot of people say, "Oh, well, if it can be hunted, picked, or gathered, then you should be able to eat it in essentially unlimited quantities." Well, that's why I'm a big fan of looking at the term anti-inflammatory, as coined by Dr. David Seaman. I'm a big fan of that, and research continues to show over and over again that inflammation is really the driving force. Because even though there's a lot of things good about paleo, there's some places I find that people fall short and actually sabotage themselves intentionally and unintentionally when they're wanting to lose weight, have more energy, reverse their diabetes, their fibromyalgia, their chronic pain, Alzheimer's, arthritis, Parkinson's, whatever it is. So the reason that we get those types of results in our clinic is because we focus on inflammation, not on paleo. So what I mean by that is fruit, for instance. If someone is diabetic or they want to lose weight or they have chronic pain, I do not recommend certain types of fruits, and I don't recommend them during certain quantities throughout the day. So that's one of the biggest myths and misconceptions. The other one is cooked. A lot of people say, "Oh yeah, well, here's this great dish and you can make it in paleo." Well, I'm not saying to eat raw meat, but what I know, a lot of the meat that's made is people have this slow roast or these fried foods, and what we find is that these foods are when they're deep fried, or when they're cooked to extreme temperatures, or when they're cooked well done. Now, obviously, if you're worried about parasites and other things, that's obviously something to consider. But these foods, when they get cooked to the highest temperatures, we have denaturing of proteins, and we have other carcinogenic type items that start showing up, and chemicals that start showing up in the foods, and then that people are ultimately ingesting. The other thing is that a lot of people will say, "Oh, this is a paleo dish." And I find that it's high fat and sugar. And we find that there's no place in nature where you find high fat and high sugar at the same time. Now, you can find high fat and high protein, obviously, in like animal products and so forth. But there's no place in nature. You're very hard pressed to find anywhere where there's high fat and high sugar. So, for instance, people say, "Oh, well, I'm making sweet potatoes," and they put them in, for instance, oil. And we know that the high fat, high oil isn't a natural delivery to our body. And I'm not saying that's not okay, but I'm just saying if you really want to get down to the true essence of what it means. The other thing is I see a lot of people calling things paleo that really aren't paleo, in the sense of people say, oh, well, coconuts are paleo, so we can make coconut flour as paleo, so that means that we can have coconut bread is paleo, or coconut flour-based cereals are paleo with almond milk is paleo. And I find that's a huge disconnect from the original source. When you look at some of the Pacific Islanders, or even just the cultures that have a high history of coconuts, we know that number one, coconuts take a lot of work and a lot of energy to find and to obtain. We also know that the coconuts in their freshest form is the healthiest. So if you go from essentially what a coconut nut or a coconut nut, sorry for the redundancy, and you bring that over to, for instance, making a cereal out of the coconut flour, or you're making bread and you're consuming it at a level that's much higher than you would ever consume in nature. And then I know some people will take, for instance, coconut flour cereals and they'll add almond milk. Well, almond milk is not a naturally occurring type substance, and neither is coconut milk for that matter in the forms that we get in the store. When you look at the coconut milk, for instance, that you get in the store in kind of that waxed cardboard boxes that you will, or the almond milk, that milk is in a delivery method, and there's other chemicals in there that would never naturally be occurring. So when you combine those, you're eating them probably with regularity and in forms that would never be naturally occurring. The other one I see a lot of people say, oh, well, quinoa is a very healthy thing, or legumes or beans or lentils. We find that a lot of seeds, when you really distill it down, a lot of seeds have what we term anti-nutrients, and those are chemicals to resist digestion. And I'm not saying that it's not okay to cook foods and so forth, but what happens is when you grind and you mill or you process into a flour, you're releasing a whole host of anti-nutrients into your body that, again, is meant to resist digestion. What do I mean by that? Well, if you've ever bitten into like an orange, if you've been eating an orange and you eat a seed, or you eat an apple and you bite into a seed, you spit it out because that seed is bitter. Well, most seeds are designed and meant to be spit out or passed through you intact and digested next year with fertilizer to grow again. So when we take things like quinoa and beans and legumes and lentils and grains for that matter and corn, and you're making them into a flour or a bowl of it, you're getting it in a delivery mechanism that your body's not used to. So think of how much time and energy it would take you to go out and procure essentially a bowl of quinoa, for instance. I mean, it would take you an enormous amount of time to do that. And for people that are doing that a couple times a week, and then they find that they're doing, coconut products another couple times a week, and other products other couple times a week, when you add it up, many of us are doing things throughout almost every day that's such a far deviation from paleo. So I stay away from the whole word paleo because there's so much misinformation on the internet, and there's so many people and marketers out there that are trying to drive their mission, and they just slap the word paleo on it, and they haven't really got to the core context. I was fortunate enough to be able to actually collaborate directly with the founder of the paleo movement, Dr. Loren Cordain, years ago. That spawned me on that path, and really talking with him to really delve down to getting to the essence, which is reducing inflammation, which we know inflammation is really the core driver behind heart disease, cancer, and really the aging process. So, and that was actually an interesting thing when I was talking to Dr. Cordain when he first came out with his book, The Paleo Diet, is that is that there was some reference that he didn't necessarily entirely agree with the name, and that his publisher encouraged him to say, well, sometimes it'll gain more traction if we can label it as a diet and so forth. So I think, if memory serves me right, and it's not my intent in this video to obviously try to put words in his mouth from a conversation that we had over a decade ago, was that his initial inkling was not to call it necessarily the paleo diet, because I know diet kind of has a fad term to it. And I know from what I know of Dr. Cordain, he holds his research in very high esteem, as I do him and his research and his team and his colleagues and so forth, and what they've done at Colorado State. So I would encourage you to consider, when you're looking at it, health is, paleo is great. There's a lot of amazing and wonderful things about it, but it's easy to get lulled into and kind of get sucked into the mindset of there's so many things out there that we consider paleo that really just aren't paleo when you really distill it down. So I'd encourage you to look at inflammation. There are some lab tests you can do to actually measure autoimmune response or immune response. As a general rule, there's certain foods that cause inflammation. There's certain foods that reduce inflammation, which we can get into in another video. So hopefully I found this helpful for you and to shed some light on why I'm not a fan of paleo in the sense of how it's perceived today. If you look back at the true work of Cordain and you really understand the essence, and you have to get down to a much more core fundamental level, even just going on his website and reading will get you to a certain level, but there's a much more granular level to really understand the process and how to approach what our genetic makeup is designed and is not designed to process and eat. You can get some amazing awareness and recognition in terms of how inflammation processes in the body and how inflammation ultimately is what we find turns on these negative genes in our body. So I'm Dr. Thad Gala, and here's to making the rest of your years the best of your years. And as always, if you like this, I'd love to hear your comments. Share it below. I'd love to hear how this is going to impact you and your journey towards health. We'll see you soon.